as I said, two different plans for the centralized government appeared. So the first plan was the Virginia Plan, proposed by Edmund Randolph, but he did not create it. The creator was James Madison. But Randolph was seen to be the most popular person there. He was the governor of Virginia and had a lot of power, so Madison wanted him to do the presentation. It was a strong central government. The Virginia Plan contained three branches of government: a legislature, an executive, and a judicial branch, a court system, a two-house legislature, bicameral, and the chief executive, or the president, would be selected by that legislature, not by the people, but by the legislature. It had a very complex voting system in which members of the lower house, we call them the House of Representatives now, were elected by the people, and then the Senate, the upper house, would be elected by the House of Representatives. But both houses would have proportional representation. Representatives, in other words, would be decided by the amount of people they had, by the population. Now keep in mind, Virginia is one of the most populated states at the time. So the Virginia Plan brought extreme controversy. Smaller states adamantly opposed because they feared that the large states would control all of the decisions and the small states would not be represented at all. Imagine in this system, Wyoming would never be heard. So they proposed an alternative to the Virginia Plan. Smaller states did. The smaller states proposed the New Jersey Plan. The main ideas. Now they did have three branches of government, just like the Virginia Plan, but the main difference was a unicameral legislature, one house with equal representation. So the question becomes, which would you vote to support? If you think about both, they both have positives and negatives. Which one would you support to vote? Which one would you vote to support? There we go. And why? You should be ready to answer that in class. For the American government, the center, there had to be a compromise. And so they agreed to a bicameral legislature, like the Virginia Plan, and it agreed to the lower house will be based upon population, like the Virginia Plan, but the upper house, the Senate, would be equal, so smaller states would have a voice. They did agree to that, but there was more compromise to be made. The main issue now becomes slavery. Southern states argued that slaves were people, and they should be counted towards population. Of course, this would give them additional delegates. However, northern states used the southern argument by saying that slaves were property, so they should be taxed by the government. After many, many days of compromise was slaves would count as 3/5 of a person for both population and taxation purposes. There was also an agreement made on the slave trade. This divided the North and the South. Northerners wanted to eliminate slavery, while Southerners said slavery was essential to what they were doing economically in the South. Cotton could not be produced without slaves. So a compromise was reached. Congress would not interfere with the slave trade for 20 years, I believe until the year 1808. At that point, Congress could start to limit the slave trade. The final compromise that had to be covered before the Constitution could be agreed to was the Bill of Rights. Individual rights were not included in the Constitution, but each state constitution had a list of individual rights. So delegates worried that the new government might abuse its power if there was no Bill of Rights. But most delegates, including James Madison, believed the Constitution provided adequate protection of the individual rights. What was agreed, the compromise was that the first Congress that met following the ratification of the Constitution would develop the Bill of Rights. So it now simply comes to approving the Constitution. September 17th, 1787, which we know is Constitution Day, the delegates assembled to sign. 3 delegates refused to sign the Constitution without the Bill of Rights. But the new Constitution only required 9 states to approve it. Essentially, all 13 states would agree to the Constitution. So as of September 17th, 1787, the United States begins functioning under the United States Constitution.